Welcome to Actions and Limits. My name is Justin Atherton. I'm the Peak Performance Consultant for Confidence Unchained. With me as always is Paul Fortune. Paul is a mindset coach and the founder of A Call to Action. And together, we make Actions and Limits. Welcome to the show, the podcast where we talk about the actions we can take and the limits we create. Make sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel so you don't miss an episode, or on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Make sure you hit that button so you stay updated on our next episodes. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Actions and Limits, and make sure you're staying updated on all our upcoming content. Paul, I am excited for our next guest. I know you know Jan personally, and I like his background. You said he's been in law enforcement, transitioned into coaching. I'm going to resonate with that. I got to pick his brain on that, man.
One of the big reasons why I wanted to bring him on, obviously, he's a great coach and he was in law enforcement for 32 years, but I feel like you and him speak the same language, and I think that you guys will get along really well, and he has a lot to offer. So that's why I wanted to bring him on the Actions Limits podcast.
Yeah, I like his bio. He's into a couple different things, but I think it's going to be interesting to pick his brain, man. It's going to be interesting talk.
Let's do it.
All right. So Jan Ferguson is a speaker, business consultant, certified Master NLP Practitioner, and NLP Trainer who served in law enforcement for 32 years. Jan has dedicated his life to empowering individuals to achieve even more in life and business. He has earned numerous awards and certifications, including the President's Call to Service Award, the Presidential Volunteer Service Award, Gold Level, multiple insurance designations, and numerous other law enforcement awards. Jan is a loving father and husband who has been married for over 34 years. And Jan's greatest passion is to empower individuals to achieve next level success. So everybody welcome out Jan Ferguson. All right, Jan, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here on the Actions and Limits podcast. So thank you for joining us, Jan.
Thank you, Justin. You and Paul, I appreciate your invitation.
We're excited to pick your brain. I like your bio. Obviously, I may have some different questions than Paul's going to have. But first thing for me is, how have you seen having a career in law enforcement? How has that affected your coaching career? And have you seen people react in a different way, knowing your background?
I really don't think so. And I'm not really sure that they even know my background. I don't come out and just say that, especially in today's environment,
Sure.
But in those types of situations, as far as how it's affected my coaching, stop and think. And I know you're well aware of this. What have you been doing since day one on the street? You coach people, you train people, you teach people, even if it's just a traffic citation. You're teaching them in a way how to be safe. You explain what they did wrong and how to better do it, even though it's momentarily. But I'm thinking, for example, a domestic disturbance. You're telling them, you might be instructing the female or the male how to get a restraining order, things like this. So you're really coaching them. And I really see it no different, except now I'm doing it more for individuals with other problems and or businesses.
I like how you put that, because a lot of people have come to me like, how did you go from law enforcement to being a personal coach? That for people that don't understand policing and the idea that we are coaching on a regular basis every day,
Absolutely.
Interaction, they don't understand. So they think that there's some kind of disconnect. So I've had those questions come up and be like, how does that flow? And it's like, well, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
Like you said, having those tough conversations with people, dealing with high stress environments and going, hey, I know you're working through something tough here. like you mentioned, some type of domestic
Absolutely.
disturbance. That's a tough situation to deal with, and helping people through those moments.
Mhm.
And like you said, coaching them through that. So
Absolutely.
it's a
I
little
never
bit,
saw it as telling them how to do something.
sure.
Yeah, you might tell them, listen, you need to go down to the courthouse, you need to do this, but then you're explaining why and what's going to happen. That's the coaching part.
Yeah, I like that, Jim.
Jan, take me back in time here. Take me back to maybe when you were a kid or in high school. Was law enforcement where you wanted to go, or did you just kind of fall into it?
Yes and no. It was, like most kids, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. At one point, I wanted to be a naval aviator and become an astronaut and go to the moon. But they landed on the moon first on my 18th birthday. So that's part of the reason that became something that I wanted to do. I love flying. I'm an FAA certified pilot, and so I've always loved that type of thing, the freedom it gives you, this type of thing. But as far as how I really got into law enforcement, I have an uncle who was an officer in our city's police department, made up to the rank of sergeant. And I've always respected law enforcement. Even when I was in Boy Scouts and everything, we'd help out. And it just was like a natural gravitation. Um, my my initial major in college was psychology. I switched over to sociology, which actually was something that I probably should have done initially, because it took me an extra year or so to kind of catch up. But with regard to psychology, the school I went to, it was more to be master's in social work, a social worker, or somebody who's working in research type psychology, as compared to actually being a psychologist or a psychiatrist. And so that really didn't apply to me, but I knew I wanted to help people. And so really, as of my college years, I still wasn't really set on what I wanted to do. And I think that a lot of college kids, they might tell you, yeah, I'm taking advanced basket weaving because that's what I want to do for a living, but they don't do it. They just don't do it. I told you last night I was a practical joker, and so it's coming out now. But and I'm sure you and Justin go through that all the time. But with regard to that, all of a sudden, I just realized I had my own insurance. I worked as a manager of a restaurant, Uncle John's Restaurant. It was a chain. I don't think it's around anymore. And again, training people and training is a big thing for me. And then I I went to I knew I could work fewer hours and make better money, so I started working for ITT Thorpe Corporation as a branch manager. To give out loans, it was like household finance, this type of thing. And part of what we had to do was as managers, get insurance licenses, because we also sold non-credit insurance. So you use household goods, for example, for collateral. You did not have household insurance or renter's insurance. We would throw some on there, but we had to be licensed to do that. Then, of course, a couple of years later, I said, why am I making them money? I should open my own insurance agency. And I went with, as a captive agent with a major corporation or major company. And so in that, again, I was training. I trained, just like in law enforcement, I was training people why they needed a certain insurance product. I was a multi-line agent. I could sell property casualty. I could sell life and health. And I would tell them why they needed it and coach them through that. Part of that, I became involved with the Life Underwriting Training Council, the American College of Financial Services. And I became what was called an LUTCF, Life Underwriting Training Council Fellow. And I used to teach disability courses, certify insurance agents in disability. And so again, there's my training thing again. But I realized as time went on, and I was doing okay in those days, but it turns out the number of hours I was putting in, my secretary / assistant was making more money per hour than I was, after I paid
Ouch.
all the bills and all that type of thing. I was doing 60, 70, 80 hours a week. That was in the old days when you went to a person's house, and it was usually after dinner. So, I was doing stuff in the office, preparing and stuff, but many times I didn't get home till 10 p.m. at night, and whether I sold the policy or not. And so it wasn't like it was a given where I was making money by doing that. But by my training people and instructing them how to do things and why they needed stuff, I had a better retention average than most of the agents in my district, which I was really good because you also get paid on residuals. We had a lot of guys that were getting rewards for new business. I wasn't one of them, but that was okay by me because I was getting it on the back end, so to speak. And so, but that's where I realized that, hey, this isn't cutting it. I'm not making enough money for what I'm doing. And that's when all of a sudden law enforcement hit me again. And I tested many different, it was during the late 70s, early 80s, where everybody was, there were corporate layoffs and everybody, because of Adam 12, wanted to be a cop. And so I tested, for example, Minnesota State Patrol. I was in Minnesota at the time. And at the location I was at, they held it in a big hippodrome type of place where they had concerts and rodeos and things like this. There were 3,000 applicants taking the written test at my location. From what I heard talking to other people, there were 9,000 people statewide taking the test that day.
Wow.
I found out later, well, I'll get to that. It turns out that I was sitting next to a St. Paul police officer, and he was telling me, yeah, you get so many points if you're a veteran, if you're a minority, if you have, a master's or a PhD, for example, if you're, I mentioned veteran already. So essentially, even though I tested really good at upper 90s, I didn't have all those other things. I wasn't a law enforcement officer. I wasn't a veteran, all this type of thing. So he basically said that if you were a Black female with a Hispanic surname, had a PhD, and was currently a police officer, you might as well go out and buy your uniform because you're gonna, your scores are gonna be just so high. And so, but it turns out they had 25 positions they were testing for, and 3 for white males. So I had a 1 in whatever chance out of 9,000 people testing, for 3 positions essentially. And so I tested really all over the country: North Dakota Highway Patrol, Texas DPS, a lot of different places. And I finally found, I was looking at becoming an instructor in the insurance field instead of selling insurance policies. And my sister-in-law at the time was living in Denver. So she sent me the Denver paper, and I was looking through different ads, and I saw one for a small agency in Wyoming. And I went out there, I tested. They were hiring for 1 position. There were 22 people that tested, and I tested number 1. And the rest, as they say, is history.
You brought up training multiple times, and this is something I've talked to Paul about before, is one of my passions and has been throughout my career. How did you use that passion for training even before you were in law enforcement and into your career in law enforcement to shape your coaching now?
I'm a voracious reader, always have been, even as a kid. I couldn't get enough comic books to read. That was the big thing back then. And, they were so thin, I'd be done with it in 5 minutes, and I couldn't wait for the annuals, like the Superman annual, to come out because they were thicker, and I'd finish those in half an hour. But, I trained myself. One of the things I did in my last agency, I am a self-instructed database programmer. I started off in my previous agency, had a crime that occurred, and the only way I could really present it without writing was by putting it in a database. They had, a dumb computer type of situation, and I jumped on it when the secretary wasn't there, And I put all the information in something that was like Microsoft Access, but it was shareware at the time. And I built the whole case in there as far as the number of victims, number of vehicles, this type of thing. And it was much easier to present to the state's attorney. And it turns out that if you wanted to know, well, how many Plymouths were there because we want to add this type of thing up, I could do a search and just figure out how many Plymouths there were. You couldn't do that in a handwritten thing. You'd be going through. It turns out in that case, there were over 300 vehicles that got vandalized in one evening.
Wow.
So it was all one case. And so I taught myself to program. I said, there's got to be a better way because everybody's not going to have this shareware program. And so I learned how to program so I can make it executable. And I'm really proud that right now, one of the programs I wrote for my final agency, the one I retired from, I wrote it in 2007, updated it to the time I retired in 2013, and they're still using it to this day. And I have not touched it since the day I retired. And so being a voracious reader, teaching myself, I realized how important teaching was. And instructing training. I helped when I was in the Administrative Services Division. My last assignment was officer in charge of the Information Technology Unit. At the time, we were going, I'm sure you're using it now, computer-aided dispatch and records management system, and had to train all the officers on it. Even just using computers. Many of the older guys at the time, this was at the very beginning of Windows 95, for example. Had one gentleman, we used to have a cart down in the sergeant's office when we used to share computers between officers. And there was a cart there that I'd check first thing in the morning if something happened to a computer. We're using tough books. And if it wasn't working, they put it there with a note usually. And this is the very beginning of our program. And I'd check it out. Well, I checked this one out. It says, will not boot. And so I grabbed it and I figured he left it on because it was dead. And so I brought it upstairs, plugged it in, it booted up, no problem. Checked all the programs he'd used, they all worked. I charged it up, put it back down, stairs so they could get it that night. Same officer was on. And I said, Frankie, which was not his real name, and I said, what gives with this? You said it wouldn't boot. And I said, I plugged it in and it worked. And he says, oh, you've got to plug it in? And I said, did you think it was nuclear powered or something like that? Of course you do. 8-hour shift, the thing would last 2.5 hours. Yeah, you got to plug it in. And we had receptacles in the vehicle, converters and everything. He just never plugged it in. So we were training then too, way back from the start, and training on records management, helped the training unit out because not only was I available, but I was also a rather proficient officer in many different ways. I don't want to pat myself on the back, but
That's all right. That's what you're here for, Jan.
Okay. For example, I to this day I still have the highest number of Chief Achievement Awards in the department. I had over 29 awards. The ribbons that we wear just like military, and I look like this. So I never wore Class A uniforms, so I never had to worry about that. But so in that situation, I would help out the training unit. They needed somebody to be the bad guy in a training scenario, for example, this type of thing. Above and beyond the training I would do that was computer or software related. And so it just kind of flowed in. And once you've trained, once you know how to train, it just keeps on flowing. It just keep on doing it. And so it just made coaching all that much easier.
Sure.
Jan, you were in law enforcement for 32 years, and I'm sure it was a love-hate relationship throughout that period of time. In the process of being in law enforcement, did you think you were going to be in that long? And when did you think, you know what, I think I want to start getting into coaching and getting into my own business? When did that come into play?
I never thought about having my own business with regard to coaching through law enforcement. Now, when I did get into it, I said, this is what I've always wanted to do. It really kind of was maybe in my subconscious. All the time I was growing up, I mentioned helping out while I was in Boy Scouts. I was always enamored by police officers. A lot of people are. And it was a whole different time back then. And so I didn't have an issue with it, but it was never in the forefront of my mind. Probably like everybody else, wanted to make a good living. And at the time, they always told you cops don't make a lot of money. And so, in fact, if I didn't move from the smaller agency that had 35 sworn officers to the one I went to in South Florida, my third year in the South Florida department, I was making more than the chief of police at my previous agency. And so it was a big difference. And of course, there was very little, there was the standard of living where I was in Wyoming wasn't near what it was down in South Florida. However, the big difference is you wouldn't be able to move away from that area. You'd have to stay where the cost of living was so much less. Sure. And now I can really go anywhere and not have to worry about that because, my pay was higher, so my pension is higher. And so, but what ended up happening was as I got out of law enforcement, during law enforcement, actually towards the last part of it, like every cop or firefighter, just like Justin is now, you usually have a side gig. Mine was computer stuff. I'd help officers out, setting up stuff. Didn't know really what I wanted to do. I wrote some computer programs for some businesses in conjunction with a friend of mine that was doing computer repair and setting up networks and everything. I remember one of my biggest one, I sold it for $5,000. And I thought that was just the greatest thing since sliced bread. And it was like the only thing that year, but hey, I made $5,000 that year. And so when I left and I retired from the police department, I set up my corporation here in Tennessee. And I wrote the same program that I used, that I wrote down in the police department. I made it a little bit different, included things. The one in the department was pretty much just for that department, but I made it where any department can use it. They could configure it differently. And so with that, I said, okay, I'm going to charge less than anybody else for these type of programs, and I'm going to make a killing. Well, I sold that many. And so it just didn't work. The one thing, as the officer in charge of the information technology unit, I was involved also with, because of dispatch and records, I was involved directly with a lot of communications. When we moved into our new building, we had to build a new building because the other one was falling apart, had a lot of black mold in it and things like this. And so I assisted the management information system department of the city, which is now information technology. I helped them set up the voice over IP system for the department, which ended up going to the entire city. And I also helped them set up, the servers that the police department would need and this type of thing. Obviously, they had it for the rest of the city, but we were different because we were the first ones that actually moved from the Linux system to Windows because that's what we needed for our software. And so with that in mind, I was able to transition to be a telecommunications consultant. I found that I could very easily sell, Vonage, for example, Vonage, Ring Central. There's over 26 that I'm certified with, where I've taken their classes. I can sell their stuff, and I was doing really well with that when after I went away from the computer stuff, and then COVID happened. And here is where I am so happy that my wife is a coach as well, even though she has she does different type of coaching, and she's just retiring. Actually, tomorrow's her last day as a teacher, and then she's going to be doing it full time. But she's been doing it almost 4 years, part time, just weekends, nights, stuff like that. And so with that, I lost, because of COVID, I lost like 3/4 of my customers. Went out of business. A lot of them were 1 or 2 seat type of businesses. And so they went out of business. Weren't sure, they went back to using cell phones or something like that just to cut their expenses. I had almost 50 leads set up that were pretty much almost good to go. Just had to get them to sign a contract type of thing, determine exactly what they wanted, but they were ones that most of them contacted me. Well, I lost all but about 3 or 4 of those. And COVID just wreaked the heck out of me. Absolutely just wreaked me. And so she said, listen, my wife said, what did you do for the last 32 years, with the police department? And I said, well, I was a cop, She goes, no. Think what you really, really did. And she kind of drilled me down like a coach would do. And she drilled me down to what I was actually doing without telling me. Because as you guys both know, everybody has the answers out there, but it's a coach's job to help them reveal it to themselves. And so she helped me do that. It eventually came down where, well, I trained people, and essentially I, told them, or I helped them understand how things worked within law enforcement. And she says, what would you call that? And I said, coaching, and the rest is history.
I like that, Jan. I was waiting for problem solver to come out as well, because that's a big part of it. But it's not exactly the same as coaching, right? Because you're helping them.
Even with that, Justin, when it comes down to it, that's all I did. That's all you do in law enforcement.
Yeah.
I don't think of it as separate.
Sure.
It's just part of it.
Yeah. It's just the way you come at it, right? I really like that. And one of the things you talked about is you help individuals achieve more in life and business. So, and Paul and I have talked to so many different coaches, and it seems like the principles are the same, but the flavor of it is always a little bit different. So I want to hear from you, Jen. Like, what is your style of coaching, and how do you get people to achieve more in their life and their business?
That's a really good question. I asked myself that back when I was first becoming certified, and I went through life coaching basically for, a year, about 14 months. I did nothing but study, take classes, get certified. So I did my life coaching. Then I did master life coaching. And at that time, I met somebody who's a prolific speaker. And it was part of my branding as well, with the company I went with. And he said, you really need to get out there more to people. You should consider, speaking, because, have the back end, obviously, at the time it was still telecommunications, but you need to speak to more people, because you can get more people to sign up for something really good, even after you talk to them for a half an hour, 45 minutes. If you have a really good presentation and a good offer, it's going to be better than just going out to each place and just selling to that one company. And so I thought about it, and I said, but you really can't do that with telecommunications. And he said, well, what else and I said, well, wait a minute, I'm doing coaching now, studying it. I'm not really going out and helping people right now, but I am getting certified so that I have the credentials to have people trust that I can do it. And he, for like 4 years, he retired twice, and he's only like in his mid 40s. And he just came out of his second retirement. And he made 1 year, his second year of speaking, he made $14 million. And he, Inc.'s 5 or Forbes top 5 or 500, whatever, fastest growing businesses, and just did phenomenal. And so we talked about it a little bit, and it turns out that part of his bio was that he spent 4 years in a monastery, like a Tibetan monastery. And he learned, even though he is not certified in it, but he learned the basics of neurolinguistic programming, NLP. And so while he's not NLP certified, he applies all those to what he's training now, and he trains speakers. And so I looked it up, and I became really, really, really interested in it. And I saw it really as coaching on steroids, because it helps a coach, for example, understand the human mind better and the subconscious and why people make the decisions they do. And that's opened up a whole new thing for me with regard to not only law enforcement, for example, but salespeople, because you might be able to teach somebody how to, not how to sell something, because they might know more than you, but there are certain techniques, for example, within NLP that will help them understand the person they're talking to more. And that's where I'm heading now.
Jen, I want to switch gears for a second, just because I want to talk with you and Justin on this matter. Jen, you're an overachiever. Justin, you're an overachiever. And I feel that's very, very important that we have people in law enforcement that are high achieving people. And I think I think that makes a good society when we have law enforcement that are high achieving, great integrity, and you both have that. And when I was growing up, and Justin and I grew up together here. And when we grew up, a lot of kids, especially boys, wanted to be in law enforcement. That was something that everybody wanted to do. And now society's a little bit different, and that's not the case so much anymore. But I think it's important that we kind of change the narrative, because I think that it should be a position of pride back to be in law enforcement. So this question is probably for both of you. What can we do as a society to change that, so that law enforcement will becoming of a thing of pride again, like it once was?
From my viewpoint, it's going to be cyclic. It's been this way. It was kind of this way in the 70s for a while. It was this way after I might just went blank.
Rodney King.
Yeah, Rodney King. Thank you. I keep on thinking George Floyd right now. Rodney King, same thing. When I arrested somebody, it's, you just arrested me because of the color of my skin. And no, I arrested you because you committed a crime. Okay, let's just make it simple. And so, people didn't necessarily like police officers at that time, but they realized, okay, well, we really do need them. And then, of course, as time went on, other things would happen. But it wasn't until, and I'm one person that don't, and I know there are many, probably both of you as well, that don't believe that George Floyd should have died the way he did. Now, because of the fact that he might have been, I don't know the details, whether he was on drugs, whether or not it would have caused his death. One doctor said yes, one doctor said no. Be that as it may, what the officer did was wrong. And I think that has created much of the problem we have now. It happened before that in a previous administration, calling what officers did was stupid, things like that. And I think that type of narrative has changed people's thoughts about law enforcement. They don't see, and of course, the major mass media did not report as they should on the good things that cops do. It's coming out a lot more now in social media, because I think it's, the people that want it to be put out there are saying, hey, look, this is the stuff we do. And, but it'll be major type things like an officer pulling a person out of a burning car. Or just recently I saw where there was an overturned vehicle with a woman underneath, and the officer, luckily it was a smaller car, actually pushed the vehicle off of her. Of course, adrenaline kicked in, and that's what he did. So with that, I think it's cyclical. What will end up happening is, especially with the defund, look at all the defunded departments that are refunding because they realize their crime statistics is just going through the roof. And so I think it's going to be where, hey, first of all, cops aren't all that bad. And then, hey, cops are heroes. Look what happened during Vietnam. Every service person was a baby killer. every person coming back was either spit on, where they weren't heralded as they came through the airport. And this is going to be the same way. Right now, everybody thanks veterans for their service. I can count on both hands in 32 plus years the number of people that have said thank you for your service. I'm actually seeing it more now when I'm talking to somebody on the phone. I happen to mention, hey, listen, I retired to law enforcement 32 years. First thing they say is thank you for your service. And so it is cyclical. I think it's going to change. I don't know when it will, but it will.
Yeah, I agree with that, Jan. It is cyclical. I was talking to a group of trainers recently, and they talked about, the question was posed, do you think law enforcement has changed a lot in the last, 100 years? And everyone, of course, was like, yes, it has. And he's like, I'm going to tell you why it hasn't. And he went to cover the principles of law enforcement and talking about protecting society and keeping the peace and going through that list and demonstrating that the principles of police work has not changed. The opinions or the perception of police work does shift from generation to generation based on what's happening in society. But I think it's going to take a couple different things. It's police are going to have to get out there and share with the citizens of what's going on, be transparent about why they do the things that we do. It's very rare for people to understand, and some police officers don't fully understand concepts about use of force and what's reasonable and what's necessary. So training people up on that, this idea of shoot the gun out of their hand and how ridiculous that is and how dangerous that can be for officers and the people involved in the situations and different civilians that are there. But it's going to take some training, like Jan's been talking about this whole time, training the citizens in those specific cities or counties or states to understand what's going on with law enforcement, to change this narrative. I've been lucky enough to work in a place over the last few years where they love us out here. Texas, it's a little bit different than working up in Minnesota right now or Oregon. I feel sorry for the officers that are put in those situations every day and have to deal with that. So it's changing the narrative, and police departments have to step up and help with that, because the small percentage of police officers that do bad things, it shines a negative light on all police officers. But we don't apply that to other professions, doctors, lawyers, priests, teachers, when it's probably the same percentage across the board of bad people doing bad things. And we never hear about that type of stuff. So I think it's going to take more training and training the citizens out there to see what they do.
Yeah, I agree. And even if you hear of a teacher, for example, doing a bad thing like, sleeping with a 14-year-old or something like that, it's usually hidden. Well, it might hit the news and then it's forgotten about.
Yeah, we're not burning down schools and saying all teachers are bad. Where's the disconnect there? Or a doctor that malpractice. Malpractice is one of the number one ways to die in this country. Yeah. I think it's 800% more likely than being shot by the police. The statistics are staggering, but no one talks about malpractice and how doctors are not doing their job, and no one's burning down hospitals. So but if you see an ambulance go by, even if it had a doctor or whatever in it, if you see an ambulance go by, if you see, you go to the hospital and it's usually when you need help, this type of thing. But stop and think, even I did it for 32 years. I see a police car, first thing I do is I check my speedometer, no matter what it is. If I have, and it happened even while I was on the job, not on the job, but on my off time, somebody will light you up for whatever reason, and the first thing you do is, damn, what did I do? And I think it's that, and I don't even know what to term it,
um, it's a trigger. You know, it's an anchor that it's a self-imposed anchor that has been passed through the generations when you first start driving. Anybody who teaches you to drive, they're setting that anchor. And I'm going into a little NLP again, but they set that anchor that when lights come on, you better watch out because you did something. You were wrong. And so it's negative right there.
Sure.
And I think that's what perpetuates it, because you see a squad car go by and they could always flip on you. And sometimes they do, but it's not on you. They might be going someplace else. And you go, wasn't me. And so, but that doesn't happen if you see a doctor walking by on the street with a medical bag, which you don't see anymore. But I mean, if you ever did, it's a totally different type of situation.
Yes.
And I don't know how to quantify it other than just saying it's a feeling. And when you see an officer, even if he's standing on the side of the road, you're going to be looking around. Where's his car? Where's the rest of the people? And you don't do that with any other profession. And because of these high, I don't want to say high frequency, it's not high frequency, these high media type events, they don't, again, report on the small things that happen. They don't even report on, Mary Jane getting a traffic ticket. What they report on is these big things. And these big things are generally when cops screw up.
Sure.
And that's why we have, Tennessee versus Garner. That's why we have things like, Arizona versus
Gant.
I might just went blank again.
Well, Arizona versus Gant, right?
Well, I was thinking that, but also Arizona versus Miranda.
Miranda as well.
And,
right.
Cops screwed up on that.
For those of you that don't know, listening, Jan is quoting case law out there that has been established that dictates how police officers in all of the United States have to behave based on certain circumstances. Monumental Supreme Court cases or different states that have created this type of case law.
And most of the time it was unfortunately because maybe an officer didn't do anything wrong at the time, but you might have gotten some good attorney that says, hey, this really doesn't match, the First Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the Second Amendment, whatever the case might be. And they make a case for it and the Supreme Court rules on it. Sure. And now it's become a law. Not necessarily that the officer screwed up. Sometimes maybe they did. But the fact remains that it, again, becomes something that is really put out there where you don't hear about changes in teaching until just recently, with the 1619 or 1610 thing that they're trying to push through the schools. And those you're hearing about.
Sure. Yeah. I don't think there's one right answer, Paul, but it's a different, it's a different time right now. And I think Jan was spot on talking about how it is cyclical and, hopefully it moves back the other way soon. But Jan, what kind of stuff are you working on right now? Like, what is your major project and how can people reach out to get a hold of you?
Probably won't surprise you, but it's in the training realm.
Okay.
I just recently, like I said, for like 14 months, I was training and I became certified as an NLP trainer March 4th, only like 2 months ago. And so I'm a type A personality. I knew I was going to pass. It was just a matter of, I probably should have been working on the courses prior to that. Because I had to become a practitioner first and a master practitioner before I could even take the trainer course. And so right now I'm putting together NLP practitioner course. Then it's going to be the master course and the trainer course. I can certify people in those 3 courses through the organization that I certified through. And it turns out that my instructor was actually instructed by one of the originators of NLP. And so he knows his stuff. The hardest thing about it, and I've written courses before that I had to get state certified. I am a state certified, I was law enforcement trainer in both Wyoming and Florida. Many different venues of the teaching including canine handler, canine training, this type of thing. But I put together plenty of courses in my career. However, these are a little tougher because of not only COVID, but it's going to be the norm from now on, where video and on-demand training, and rather than you traveling to San Francisco or Nashville or wherever else for training, spending a week away from your family, 3 days away, the hotel fees and everything, virtual is going to be where it's at for businesses. It is now, it's going to continue being that way. And at least in my estimation, some are going back to the office, but when it comes to meetings and training, this is the way it's going to be. And so the hardest part is that I have to do 20 to 30 hours of video for each of the courses.
Sure. Yeah.
So I have to write it out. I want to make sure, type A personality, I have to make sure it's perfect. Now, I just did a thing saying, there's no such thing as perfection. I did that 2 days ago on Tuesday. But I want it. I've never been in Toastmasters or anything like that. I want it to be where I'm not doing a lot of ahs and ands and things like this. It's one thing when you're talking and trying to think of things on the fly as we're talking now, but when you're teaching a course, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing. And so with that in mind, I get a script up, I get it ready, I practice it and practice it and practice it, then I record it. And I actually did the very first one with this background that you see right now. Then I did one with the background I used last night, for example, that has my branding on there and everything.
Cool.
I didn't want to do that for this type of course. So I did a 31-minute segment and realized I couldn't use it. And so I'm redoing that whole thing, it's like take 2 type of thing.
Sure.
And that was actually like take 5, but so it's just one of those things.
So it's like you're becoming an actor.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly the case. And I don't want to use a teleprompter because then you're looking forward.
Sure.
And it doesn't become real.
Yeah.
And so, what I'm working on, Justin, is getting my training ready so I can certify coaches. And there are a lot of health professionals, believe it or not, that that believe in NLP, and use it with their patients, not just psychologists, but even doctors, because when people come in, might be hypochondriacs or whatever, or, this hurts really bad. Well, then don't do that type of thing. They need to be able to talk on a different level with things are so different nowadays with everybody, and they have to talk on a different level with their patients. And it's the same thing with coaches. Like I said originally, in my estimation, NLP is coaching on steroids. That's what I tell people. And there's others that'll tell you that NLP is getting people to do what you want them to do and have them think that it's their idea. Essentially, well, that's any kind of coaching as well, because you're just leading them down to the path that they have the answer to.
Sure. So it's a fine line between persuasion and manipulation, right?
Yes, exactly.
And
exactly.
I think it's more about intent when it comes to that. Like, what are you doing it for nefarious purposes, or are you trying to help them out? So it's people get those confused. I think.
Exactly. And that's, believe it or not, one of the things that my NLP instructor, and I had the same one for all 3 courses, drilled in on. Because with NLP especially, you're really teaching people, or you're helping them to get into their subconscious and change that, because that's where decisions are made. The 90% of your brain that's active all the time, even when you're sleeping, that's the thing that is making the decisions.
Sure.
The easiest way to show an example on this is if you try to stop smoking, for example, by sheer willpower, it's not going to happen. That's why you go back, because every day you see somebody smoking or something, you're saying, it becomes so tiring. I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to smoke. And it becomes tiring. But with, NLP techniques or even hypnotherapy, things like this, it actually changes your subconscious. And there are ways to do it where even associating with something you hate, like Brussels sprouts, for example, if
Sure.
all of a sudden, if you think of it that way, you
Creating
say,
like
"I
a
hate
negative
those."
anchor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mhm.
Very, very
You may
similar
have
to
said
that.
it, Jan, but NLP, what does that stand for?
Neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay.
Neuro being the brain, linguistic, let's face it, communications is everything. We're doing it now. It's the exchange of ideas, and it's how we relate with people. When you're first born, you have no core values at all. Everything that you take in, everything that people put out in communication is sinking into you. That's how you develop your core values. And so with that, linguistic has to do with the communication with people. You can't get people in coaching or anything else to listen to you until you have that rapport with them. In police work, it's because you're wearing that badge and they've called you. So it's instant rapport to a certain extent. You build more rapport as they realize that you know, they know that you know what you're doing.
No, like, and trust, right?
Exactly, exactly. Paul, they know you're a career coach and you're going to help them. You show them that you know what you're talking about, and it builds that rapport day after day. Positive referrals, for example, initiates that rapport at a higher level than somebody just seeing your webpage and calling you up.
Sure.
And so that's the linguistic part. And the programming is what I was just talking about, getting your subconscious dialed in differently so that you do things from that point on differently.
In
It
essence,
deals
changing
with,
your values or beliefs, right?
yeah, and it deals with fears, for example, things like that. Fear of flying. They use similar type of techniques for people that are afraid to get on an airplane,
Mm.
or people who have claustrophobia, things like this. And so every one of those treatments really deals with changing your subconscious and the way you think about something. You
A
still
lot of
might have
great
that
stuff.
fear, but it gets pushed back because you realize maybe it's irrational.
Sure. I like that, Jan. A lot of great stuff, a lot of great information for people to digest and to look into. And your website again is it janbferguson.com?
.com. Yes, sir.
Got it. And we'll make sure to put that down there. And then it looks like we got another website, the janf360.com as well.
Right. That 360.com is my branding site. It's my personal site. With that site, you can find everything, my social media contacts, phone number, text, WhatsApp, everything, a way to get in touch with me.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll make sure all that's down here in the show notes. Jan, we like to wrap up our show with asking our guests 2 questions. And with the idea of the title of our podcast in mind, Actions and Limits, what would you say is the number one action that people can take right now that can make a huge difference in their life?
I find that so many people are afraid to do things for whatever reason. Fear of failure, I think, is the biggest thing. In fact, I do Tuesday's tip and Thursday's thoughts. I did this on Tuesday. Nike has a slogan for it: just do it.
Mm.
And with that, I always add, done is better than perfect.
There you go.
And as I mentioned, I was trying to get things perfect. There is no such thing as perfection. My perfection could be your flaws, this type of thing. And so just do it, but don't be afraid to do it, because it's not going to be perfect. And really, people don't care if it's perfect. They want the information. It doesn't have to be perfect.
Sure.
Probably unless you're a heart surgeon working on a person's open heart, then I want them to be perfect. But other than that,
little different context there. Yeah, I
yeah,
think there's studies out there that talk about how it's actually more relatable if they see errors. And
yeah,
if you're too perfect in your presentation, people don't trust it because
right,
it's not relatable.
exactly.
So the other question, and this may go hand in hand with this, but these self-imposed limits that we put on ourselves, what is the one that you've seen that's most prevalent that people need to remove right away?
I think it's probably not believing in themselves. I was that way. It took me so long to get my first video out on anything, whether it be, I had a YouTube channel since 2011, never did anything with it. I've had LinkedIn, never put anything out on it. Went through courses on how to really do it. I can speak in front of people. I have no problem with it. But I want it to be perfect in the front of the video because that is forever type of thing, probably. And I didn't believe I could do it. So along with what I've been talking about, I had to trick my mind. I bought the best HD, and I talked about this the other day too. Bought the best HD webcam that I could afford and knew was out there. I got streaming software. I got green screen and the lighting. Have a mini studio in my office here. And with all that, I said, now I bought all this stuff. I spent this money. Damn it, I've got to use it. And that's what I did.
I like it,
So
Jan.
people have to believe in themselves that they can do it. Now, do I get butterflies before I go on? Yeah, I want to make sure I don't screw up. But other than that, hey, if I do, I've stumbled before. Paul still likes my my presentations, and
I do.
and I've
I do. I'm
actually
a big
heard from
fan.
other people that I was afraid, mostly because a lot of my friends on Facebook, for example, are former employee, former officers that served with me or are still serving. Maybe started 2 years before I left, and so I'm thinking, what are they going to think about me?
Sure.
Here I am, the cop, and now I'm doing this. What the heck, And so I was really worried about what they were going to say. You have to believe in yourself and don't care what other people think, as long as it's legal, moral, and in good taste.
I love it, Jan. I went through the same thing, so I completely understand. But thank you so much for coming on here, Jan. We loved picking your brain and getting your version of coaching and how you came into that. And I really think that everyone watching or listening right now got something that they could take away from this. So, Jan, thank you so much for coming on the Actions Limits podcast.
I appreciate you guys having me, and it's been a real pleasure.
I was glad that you brought Jan on. It was good to get a different perspective on someone that, has been in law enforcement and how he approaches the coaching, because it's not something you see often. I've seen a lot of the military guys. We had a couple of those guys on, like Brian came on, and his cohort as well. Oh man, Greg, Brian and Greg. There you go. But so you see a lot of the military guys, get into coaching or something, but it seems more rare to see someone else in law enforcement that really get into that. So I'm glad that you brought him on and gave another perspective on someone transitioning from law enforcement to coaching.
Well, I liked his answer on it. He said that all he did was train. That's what he did in law enforcement. He was in training, coaching people. So it should be a seamless transition. I think it's hard for other people outside of law enforcement to see that, but talking with you, Justin, obviously you agree with Jan. It's a seamless process. So it's just a matter of educating people and allowing people to do what they want to do. I mean, I think a lot of people, especially in law enforcement, may want to get into coaching, but they don't want to do that because of what other people think about that. And we need to just break that stigma. And if you want to do something, just do it.
Yeah, I think anyone that's in that coaching world, when training the new people or being part of that, it kind of ends up, it's not like that you want to, it's kind of like, man, like, how can I keep this going? And then the idea of coaching comes up, and it's like, well, yeah, that'll work. That will let me allow me to do the same things that I've been wanting to do in a different type of context. So really glad he came on, and it was great to pick his brain. So you said you found a question in the emails for our segment, Ask Paul Anything. It's a good question. It's a good question, Paul.
Hey, it's a pretty good question.
Let's
so
go.
This is from Nicole in Nevada, okay. And it reads, Paul, when you go on vacation, do you like a warm climate or a cold climate? And the answer is warm, but as you know, Justin, I follow the Cowboys all over the nation, and I've gone to and I love Boston. So I'm not bagging on Boston because it's a beautiful place to go. But I've gone to Boston in the middle of winter, and I remember going into the airport having all this warm clothes that I was having to wear, and looking across the way and seeing people in Hawaiian shirts going to Hawaii, going, what is my thought process here? I'm going to a place where it's like cold and I have to bundle up like I'm going to Alaska, where these people across the way are just wearing shorts and flowered Hawaiian shirts. Something must be wrong with this picture. So warm climate, I would think, is where I find myself a lot of times going on vacation in cold climate.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Just coming back from some warm climate myself, so yeah, it's a lot easier to take off some stuff and try to stay cool rather than stack on layers and layers of clothes and be functional in that. But yeah, I know you follow the Dallas Cowboys around, and you've told me some different weather stories that you had to sit through rain or cold or snow or whatnot. So cool experiences, I'm sure. But then you'll gladly go back to your warmer climate out there in Southern California. So
yeah, absolutely.
Good question. Simple question. Make sure to keep sending your questions into the email actionsandlimits@gmail.com, and you can get your question featured on the show. Another great guest, Paul. Jan was a great guest. I'm glad you were able to bring him on. So great episode, man.
For Justin Atherton, this is Paul Fortune. We'll see you next week.
All right. See you next Monday. Thank you for listening to the show. Don't miss an episode. Click and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform, and find us on Instagram and Facebook under Actions and Limits to stay updated on all our upcoming content. Continue to email the show at actionsandlimits@gmail.com for our segment Ask Paul Anything. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.